Today's episode is brought to you by the Above Board podcast and the book Conversations: How to Manage Your Business Relationships One Conversation at a Time. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Conversations About Conversations. This is a show for people who want to explore the kinds of conversations in our lives that are difference-making and help us all be more effective. I'm joined today by my guest, John Kennedy. John, welcome to Conversations About Conversations.
Ivan, thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it. Looking forward to talking with you today.
Yeah, now I know a little bit about you, although officially this is our first conversation.
Yes.
You never get a second chance to make a first impression in
Right.
conversations, except we know each other from each other's podcasts, from looking at social media. Like, I feel like I know you pretty well. So let me say a little bit about what I know. I know you're a financial advisor. I know you founded your own company. You have your own podcast. You came up with a really creative name for your podcast and your company. I think your middle initial is F, if I heard that right.
Yes.
So I'm going to be able to tell my parents that I had JFK on my podcast.
Ivan, it gets worse. My wife's name is Jackie, and that's not a joke.
It's wonderful. I've listened to 3 of your Above Board episodes. I've listened to How to Lose Money, which I enjoyed. Does your friend circle lower or lift you, which I really enjoyed. Making time for yourself, which totally got me thinking about how I could be more effective with my time. With that introduction, again, welcome.
Yeah, man, I'm excited. Like I said, and we obviously talked a few minutes before we started this, and I agree. Like, I feel like I know you, and I think that's the beauty of technology, the world that we live in right now, that I've been following along for a while. You know, your journey on LinkedIn, listening to your podcast. We share a good friend in common with David DeSell. And it's interesting talking for the first time, where I feel like I've talked to you and you probably feel the same way, which is the beauty in all this.
It's beautiful. So you have the name John F. Kennedy. Is the F Fitzgerald or
close? Francis. So I'm JFK and my wife is Jackie. And I seriously considered at one point when we got married, should we just do the reverse and I'll take your last name because it would just be easier. But, it's fun doing the whole JFK and Jackie O thing. I remember early on in my career, so I started in the financial services industry when I was 21. That was around 2008. I did what everybody was told to do, which is get uncomfortable and go to things like the local Rotary Club. Shout out to my local Orange County East Rotary Club here in Orlando. But I was this young person who was around people who were 50s, 60s, 70s of age. Many were retired. And I remember thinking, like, what do I have in common here? How do I have a conversation? And it was one of those, like, just practicing and discipline of kind of having to put myself in these discussions with folks from all different walks of life. The JFK thing is what stood out for everybody. And that was kind of a lesson for me early on in my career. I was like, oh, well, this is a great sticking point. Like, they might not necessarily remember the conversation, but they'll remember my name. And through that, I can actually try to, maybe use that to develop and deepen a relationship with somebody. And I think that was probably the first lesson I had of learning the value in having a name that sticks with people. Because when I was a kid, if I can be honest, like I got teased about the name John F. Kennedy.
One of the things I did too, I was in Toastmasters for a while.
Ah, yes.
And I picked up the audio of JFK's major speeches. And I haven't done this in a while, but I'm going to do this now that I'm thinking about it later today, is play his inaugural address. I don't have all the complete recall right now, but there was a time when I could say the entire inaugural address by heart. And when I play it in my car, I feel so empowered. Like when you say, meet any hardship, bear any burden, pay any price to assure success of liberty. United, there is little we cannot do in a host of cooperative ventures. Divided, there's little we cannot do. Anyway.
Ivan, I'm impressed. I've never met someone that knows that speech. They might know that ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. And then it stops there. So call me impressed, man. That's awesome.
It's a brilliant speech. And
yeah.
Every time I do it, I feel very powerful.
Yeah. Fantastic.
There's a line that goes, let he who rides on the back of the tiger know that they might wind up inside. Yeah. And it's a specific call out to Russia and their collaboration with China.
What I've learned in school, observing different, I mean, I've watched so many documentaries about him, and I think there's a, and maybe this is what you're thinking too or getting at, but his ability to be such an effective communicator and unite the nation was unparalleled. I mean, I would say was truly his gift. I mean, obviously he was a smart man and all those things, but he had such a gift for that. And then you see different, because he could command a room. You know, you could listen to speeches, his address to the nation. I mean, obviously he could command the attention, but then I've also seen stuff that's more like documentary style, like just him having private conversations with, one-on-one. And he was also very charismatic and could connect with people. He had that innate ability. I did decide, however, with my children, we did not do the John Caroline thing. We decided to go a different route because then I just thought people would think we're like obsessive Kennedy followers. And I thought that'd be a little too heavy.
Well, I think you were kind to your kids to not follow through on the whole Kennedy legacy there.
Yeah, and let them build their own legacy.
And you didn't name anybody Ted, did you?
No, definitely not. Stayed far away.
So let's segue to another name, because I think this name is fantastic too. The name of your company, Candor Path. And I'll just share with the audience a couple of the words that are attractive to me, but also make me realize we are part of the same conversation. On this, just from your LinkedIn profile, that you value realistic information, clear communication, and proactive behavior shared with close client advisor relationships. So like all of that is stuff that I embody and stand for. And maybe I've taken all of your thunder in going through those words, but what I'd like to hear from you is a little bit more about Candor Path, how you came to that and what you stand for and what your conversation you're leading in your business and your life.
The word candor just means so much to us. In a rapid fire session one night years ago, when we were trying to come up with the name of the company, we kept circling back to the word candor. And we use internally, even with clients, we use this term radical candor quite a bit, which means not just that you're being honest, but you're being authentic. Like you're being true to the situation. And that is one of our guiding values, our core values of our company. And so Candor Path Financial, making those two connective words, as we describe, like an open and honest, transparent path or journey to their financial success. Like our purpose, cause, and passion, something that we talk a lot to clients about or prospects about, or just people within our community, is to enrich the quality of a client's life and redefine their relationship with their money. It's an important word. And obviously in my industry, like fiduciary is such a common word. It's also I would argue that it's overused. Like I don't even know that people necessarily know what that means anymore. When we left the prior company we were at and we started Candor Path, it was really just, we kind of viewed that as our opportunity to create meaning and fulfillment within our community, both with our clients, with our families. It was a fun journey. We were obviously nervous to start the company. We felt like, hey, this is a cool name. This really represents the spirit of who we think we are. This captures that. But are clients going to see that? Are they going to feel that the same way? And I can remember so many instances of conversations with clients where we said, hey, look, we're starting Candor Path. We'd love for you to come with us. Here's why. Here's our purpose, cause, and passion. If you believe in that and you believe in what we're doing, we'd love to keep working and serving you. If not, that's okay too. No is not the wrong answer or an unacceptable answer. And fortunately for us, all of our clients came with us. And it's fun too, because a lot of people, you've maybe heard it, but it's not like commonly used enough where it sort of captures your attention, I find.
In the spirit of candor, could you give me an example of the kind of candor that would be radical?
Something that we say all the time, which was a part of a brainstorm session with our mutual friend, David DeSalle, which is we refuse to maintain marginally satisfied clients. We communicate with our clients throughout the course of a year, not only about their financial planning and different, areas of their financial life, but how are we doing? Like, are we meeting expectations? And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean, is the portfolio growing? Are we, beating the benchmark? I mean, when the markets dropped 35% last year, were you hearing from us enough? Were we sending enough messages? Were we having phone calls with you, Zoom sessions and meetings with you? Are you feeling heard about your challenges, your opportunities, what you have going on in your life? And so we have lots of very intentional conversations with clients, because if on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 represents the most satisfied somebody could be. And I heard this a long time ago, which I don't know if you've ever heard this, Ivan, but I really try to adopt this. So I'll say to somebody, not necessarily a client in this conversation, but like on a scale of 1 to 10 of something, and you had to remove 7 from the equation, what would you answer it? Because 7 is the most mediocre answer you could give it. Because if it's a 6 out of 10, that's like failing. And if it's an 8 out of 10, that's pretty good. But if you removed 7 on a scale of 1 to 10, and you had to answer that question, what would it be? And to me, if a client answered a 6 or below, that's a marginally satisfied client. Like they haven't left us yet, or they might not have a reason to leave until a reason becomes apparent. But we'd rather make sure that they're not unsatisfied or marginally satisfied to begin with. And that's a pretty bold statement, I find, because if I said that to somebody, they'd probably, their response is like, well, what does that mean? What do you do? Like, how do you make sure they're not marginally satisfied? And the beauty of the conversation we're having today, which is conversations about conversations, is half the battle is communication. Like literally having a very transparent discussion about your expectations, how you feel. And oftentimes that can go such a long way.
If you had to say a different number than half the battle, like if I were to take half off and maybe even from 5 to 7 off, and I said, you have to pick what % of the battle is conversations.
9.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is, especially in my industry. We see when a client comes to us or a potential client calls us, it's never because, most of the time anyway, because their portfolio didn't outperform, or it's because they say, I haven't heard from the guy or gal that I work with. I've reached out, or I've tried to schedule a meeting, or this happened in the market and I never heard from them. And I hear from someone that I know, like, and trust, whether it's a family member, a neighbor, a friend, a work colleague, but I've heard from someone that I know, like, and trust, that they're hearing from Candor Path all the time. And it's communication. I mean, honestly, it should be a 10. It's a 10. It's a 10, Ivan. That's how right. Much of the battle it is.
I'm going to say in a radical way that it's a 15.
Yes.
I used to think that knowing a lot was going to make a difference. Mm-hmm. And as I've gone and evolved and built client relationships and had people follow me, let me lead them where they need to go and be in their lives, it doesn't have to do with what I know. It has to do with 2 things. One is how much I care. I gave a speech recently in a speech competition called Turning Bear Markets into Care Markets.
I love that.
So number 1 is caring. Number 2, it's the ability to manage your relationships one conversation at a time. And why I like also seeing the word clear in your description of what you believe in is because I believe in that too. Like clear at every stage of the conversation, clear in what the conversation is for at the opener, clear in when you explore your client's needs, making sure it's clear, complete, mutual, then clear on the solutions to address the needs, and then clear on what the resolution is. To overuse the word clear, if you put an L, then the stages in my model, in my book, and in this conversation is the word clear conversations. Create, learn, and or listen, explore, address, resolve.
And you said something that was important. You said learn and or listen. And I definitely recognize this about myself. Early on in the industry, communicating with clients, you almost feel this overwhelming desire or need, even though it might not exist, you feel it in your own mind, to just verbally fire hose somebody with the information that you know or you think you know. Yeah. And that ends up not being an awesome conversation because there's not, it is a bit of a dance. It's a give and take. And ultimately, I've found that someone, especially in the early stages of these discussions, like they want to feel heard and simply understood. And I'm glad that you said listen, because that's one of those things where Matt and I kind of internally say this to each other a lot, like listen more than you talk. Listen more than you talk. Going into a meeting, it is easy to have the propensity to lean on facts and information and data that we could fire hose with somebody, which is good. And maybe the context of that discussion may necessitate it. So you want to be prepared, but sometimes listening more than you talk is pretty important too. Absolutely.
I want to switch gears to talk about your podcast.
Sure.
What had you create a podcast?
We initially did this with the intent of coming up with a creative and new way to communicate with clients. And so we wanted to invite clients into our lives in a totally unique way. Obviously, everyone listens to and consumes podcasts these days. It's a pretty well-known form of communication, but that's really how we view it. We see it as, because if you've, like you said, does your friend circle lower and lift you? What does it have to do with money? Absolutely nothing. And that's the point. And in fact, the most listened to ones are the ones where we talk about how we lost our fathers at a young age, or how we're dealing with, how we dealt with business partnership and Matt and I coming together. We also have a social media influencer. His handle's The Rich B. And Rich is just he's a great facilitator of conversation too. And he definitely makes it a little more fun than just like two CFPs going back and forth talking to each other. But the Nexus event of like, why do we want to do this, was to communicate with clients differently. Does every client listen to it? No way. But does some listen to it? You betcha. And that matters so much, because then we'll have a meeting and a client will say something that they only could have gathered from the podcast. I'm like, how did you know that? Did we talk about that? And they're like, no, we listened to Above Board with Candor Path. And in that, we've just found it to be so successful. Just like we talked about at the beginning of this, like I feel like I know you. We've never spoken directly until now, but I feel like I know you. Why? Because I've listened to hours of your show and I've watched videos of you on LinkedIn. Like I know your sense of communication, your style. I knew we'd hit it off because of all that. And it's tremendous. And it's a totally unique way to communicate with clients. And we have something else, a daily Alexa skill called Candor Path 365. And it's with the same intent. It's micro form content, no more than 90 seconds of sometimes a market update, sometimes new legislation coming through that might affect someone's finances or estate planning. Sometimes it's with us and our kids, and we're just talking about financial habits and daily disciplines. And same idea. It's just a method, a tool to communicate in a different way that someone can opt into or not if they want to.
I have found that editing makes a big difference. That there are so many tangents, run-on concepts that come out of our mouths as we're thinking through what we want to communicate versus thinking before we communicate. Yeah. That editing just makes everybody look better. Removes the ums and ahs and that people do. Like you can't always pull out the double clutches, the hemming and the hawing, but when you can. So it's kind of like, at first I just had this podcast. I never edited anything. It was more important to just get it out there, take the reps, be courageous. But as I've gone, like I can already see some of the ums for both of us that I'm going to remove from this podcast. And it feels so powerful. I don't want to say godlike, but like to be able to remove when I say something that I wish I hadn't said, like to say, I've been in the industry twice as long as you, like I could remove that.
Yeah.
Right. But now I can poke fun of saying that. I would say my feedback to you, my radical candor to you, is that it works. The three of you really work well together. It's a very good dynamic. Because yeah, if you just had the two business partners together, then people will be listening for, oh, they're going to talk about their business. But by bringing in the third person, you really have created something really nice there.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And an ancillary benefit that I've learned over the years is I genuinely feel like it's made me a better communicator, because I've been on so you're talking about post editing and being able to remove ums and ahs, and that kind of brings the pressure down of a conversation that's being recorded a little bit, because the second it hits record, you're kind of like, uh-oh, now all of a sudden I have a frog in my throat and I need to take a sip of water, or I'm going to sneeze, or something weird's going to happen, and it's there forever and ever, amen. So yes, you're right. Being able to post edit and remove things just brings the tension down, I've learned. But for the most part, the conversations still are pretty authentic, and they're rolling, and it sort of navigates just like this one. It just navigates naturally the way it's going. And I'm interested to hear from your point of view if you feel the same way. But for me and my business partner, Matt, we've noticed that it's allowed us to be more effective communicators. Both in client meetings, in speaking engagements. At first, I remember the first podcast I was ever a guest on, and boy, was I nervous. And just getting uncomfortable and allowing yourself to feel that and just work and struggle through it, I believe it makes you a more effective communicator, which is pretty important. Do you agree with that? Have you found that to be the same experience with your podcast?
Not exactly. No, I feel like I'm very much a performer behind a one-way mirror. Okay. And although I've had well over 10,000 downloads, I really don't know who is my audience yet.
Right.
The first 100 episodes, I did just me alone talking to the camera and having a conversation about conversations. That was super awkward. One of the reasons I was excited to have you on the podcast is I am interested in people who lead conversations. And what does a podcaster do? They lead conversations. Also, it's really great to, as a networking, as a creative tool. I mean, we're all so busy. Like if we took this time to get to know each other over coffee, that would make a difference for both of us. Mm-hmm. But now it's going to make a difference for, I don't know how many people. Yeah. But if you're listening right now, our intention is it's going to make a difference for you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And something else I'll say on the theme of just getting uncomfortable, before we started the podcast Above Board with Candor Path, we recorded a lot of videos that we shared through various, social media, Facebook and LinkedIn and so on. And boy, were those uncomfortable too. Like you were talking about the first 100 or so episodes of your show where it's just you and you're talking to yourself, you're seeing yourself. It's really weird. And I felt the same way about not a long form content like yours, but even a 30 or 60 second video that I was doing. And it was one of those like lean in, get uncomfortable and work through it. And we use the podcast to work through that uncomfortableness and get better at communication. But another reason we use it, candidly, Matt, my business partner, we'll come up with content that we're going to create and produce for clients and so on. And most of it is led with the intent of communicating to clients. Like a secondary, tertiary benefit is a prospect sees that and that deepens the connectivity to us. But really it's client communication. They're scrolling through their feed on their phone and they hit us on Facebook and it's like, oh man, there's Candor Path again. And a day later they get an email from us. And then, we're just staying in front of them, staying current. But Matt said at one point, he's like, John, stop making me do these videos. Like, what are we doing here with these videos? He is the most charismatic. I mean, the way he commands, in conducting a client meeting, the way he can command a room, he's so intelligent. He's a CFP as well. He's an enrolled agent as well. And so we started doing these podcasts. It was fun because all of a sudden, like we said before, pressure goes down. We're just having a conversation. And next thing you know, it's all on video and audio. And we can create snippets and micro content out of that. And so it's been also a means of just being able to reshare information of different things that we talk about. And again, just, for us, it has been very useful to get better. And I agree with you, Ivan, about, using that as a bridge to connect with other podcasters, with other people that are influential or have something important to say, whether it's within our industry or not. If it ends up helping one person, like that's huge. And Matt and I had to overcome that too, because we were like, well, who wants to hear us talk about IRS law changes and, yada, 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 boring topic. And there are some people that are seeking out some of the information that we're talking about, let's say on our podcast. And so being able to overcome that a little bit was huge. But I like that thought that you had said, where the ability to connect with other people through the use of, being a guest on a show. I mean, that's huge. And honestly, that's better than a cup of coffee. I mean, it eliminates, you don't have the face-to-face component. I agree with that. But I think in a lot of ways, it makes the conversation that much more intentional and meaningful. Don't you?
I do. Well, I'm ready for John F. Kennedy's closing address.
Okay.
So the floor is yours. This is your opportunity to close.
Oh, all right. Well, I appreciate it. I think the biggest thing that I'd like to say, obviously, first of all, thanks for having me on the show. But if anybody listening to this finds this information remotely useful or interesting, we'd love for you to listen to our podcast as well as this one. Ours is Above Board with Candor Path, and I'm passionate about what we do. We love communicating with clients. I actually agree with you. I wish I hadn't said a 9 out of 10. I wish I had said 15 out of 10 as you did, Ivan, about the importance of communication and conversation. Everything we do in client experience is led with conversation and over communicating. And that stuff's so important. So the work that you're doing, man, it's being followed, it's being watched. I mean, I'm like the perfect evidence of that. Like, I connected with you after you and David DeSalle shared episodes together, being guests on each other's show. And I loved it. And I've not stopped listening since. So kudos to you and all the good work you're doing within our industry.
Thank you. I think the experience of the one-way mirror is, I don't know that you're listening. Like, I've had 12,000 downloads, and I couldn't tell you more than like 20 people who I know have heard one. So one of the things that I've done, I'll listen to an episode of David DeSalle's podcast. And after I'm done listening, I send him a text. I say, I just listened to it. Great episode. Because I realize how important that is. So anyway, so that's something that makes a difference, right? Like, anything we communicate to others makes a difference.
Thanks for saying that. In fact, I think that motivates me to do the same, Ivan, because I will agree with that statement. We see the downloads and the listens, and we're going, who's there's no way to segment or understand or find what clients are listening or who is. And a good amount of it is Rich's social media following. I mean, the guy's verified on different platforms. That matters in today's world, but it's so refreshing. And it feels good to be on the receiving end of that when a client comes into a meeting and says, I just listened to your podcast about how to lose money, and I thought that was hilarious, and you made some great points, and thank you for doing that. That feels so good. And that's a great point. Thanks for saying that, Ivan.
And, in fairness, I've listened to you 4 times, and I didn't tell you until this conversation that I've listened to you 4 times. But I really like your podcast. I endorse Above Board with Candor Path. And thank you for joining me, JFK, John F. Kennedy, in this conversation about conversations.
Well, thanks for having me. First time caller, long time listener, I appreciate it, man.
Music to my ears. Any
Cool.
Any other thoughts? Anything I can do for you?
No, I mean, I think what's interesting is you do a lot for me. You just don't know it, which again, is kind of to that final parting thought that you made. I've been listening to your show for quite some time, and in preparation, I listened to a few, and just grateful for the stuff you're doing. I'd like to, yeah.
Which episodes stick out to you?
The one with your wife. So I really like that one. It was like 10 lessons in business and in marriage or personal life. Uh-huh. And I've listened to that a couple of times. I've sent that to my wife, I enjoyed it. And it actually had me thinking like it would be fun to do that with my life. Like it's a completely different perspective. And if you have someone listen to that, what insight that gives them to feel connected to you, to hear your wife talk and someone that knows you really well in an intimate way. Like that's cool, man. Like I just think that that's really fun.
There were 2 episodes that we recorded on that day, our 20th anniversary. And one we did that was business and meant to be consumed by the audience.
Yeah.
And another we just did for friends and family. I wouldn't say more intimate, but the questions were not like, that was advice for business people, like what you could learn from a 20-year marriage towards business. But on the other one we did, and I do not regret, and since you're a podcaster, I totally encourage you to do this, or really anybody, is I prepared a list of questions. So I gave her a chance to review them and gave me a chance to think about what my answers were going to be. And we asked things like, what do you think? What did you think of me when you first met me? And what do you think I'm going to be doing 10 years from now? And what do you appreciate most about me? And what do you remember most about me? And we went through the list and we just shared it with friends and family, but I have no regrets of doing that. Like that will be like a time capsule for our relationship.
Yeah.
And that's something else that, yeah, I totally recommend.
Well, what I like about that is you kind of said earlier, like the when you're recording a show like this, you have that performer mentality. Like you have to be on, you have to be engaged. There's no excuse not to be. And especially with your spouse, like life gets busy, it gets hard. We have 2 small children at home, and last night's a good example. We sat on the patio, had a glass of wine, and we were talking to have a conversation, but there were moments where each of us were drifting off in the conversation. Like it was a good conversation, but we weren't fully there. Like Monday Night Football was on in the background, like our dog was barking and we weren't fully there. There were things that were detracting us. But what I like about what you just said is you record the show, whether you make it public or not, it creates this very intentional conversation where you both are on and you're engaged. And there's like, you have no excuse not to be, because it could be like used for something. So I like that idea. I think that's different. Man, that's a different way to think about having a conversation with your spouse. It's kind of cool. I think we should try it.
I was very surprised that she was willing to do it.